Welcome to the tutorial on how to use the ZAS database of clause-embedding predicates. In this tutorial, we will explain how the database is organized, how you can adjust the data table for your needs, and how to filter the data to answer your research questions. But first, we will show you where to find more detailed information and support. There is a detailed user's guide available that provides you with all the information you need to work with the database. For example, the annotation scheme, the terminology we use, or how to get the best out of the available filters. In the last chapter, the guide also gives suggestions on how to properly reference data taken from the database and where to find support. In the table view, you can also use the shortcuts next to each column header to immediately go to the relevant section in the user's guide. But let's get started with the database. An important distinction made in the database is the one between predicate table and example table. The predicate table is a list of predicates and their associated properties. Each predicate is listed only once. Some of these properties are about the predicate itself, for example, whether it's a prefix or a simplex verb. Other properties depend on the example sentences associated with the predicate. For instance, if a predicate is associated with an example sentence for infinitive embedding, then it's a property of the predicate to embed infinitives. All the example sentences of the predicates are listed in the example table, a list of example sentences collected from different German corpora. Accordingly, in this table, you may see multiple entries for a predicate, each listing a different example sentence and its annotated properties. What's important to know is that these examples attest the embedding behavior of the German predicates exhaustively. If there is no example sentence for a certain type of embedding or a certain associated property, then we weren't able to find any. In both tables, you can customize the columns you want to be displayed by clicking on Column Visibility. Adjust the table to your needs by adding or deleting columns with a single click. You can also sort the data alphabetically by clicking on a column header. One click gives you an ascending order, 2 clicks gives you a descending order. You can order several columns simultaneously by pressing Shift while clicking. Let's have a look at how to filter the data once you have selected the right table, predicate or example table. There are 2 ways to filter the data. First, you can use the table filters below each column. Depending on the content of a column, you can either select a filter from a drop-down menu. For example, let's filter all sentences that are an instance of infinitive embedding. Now you only have the infinitive examples in your table. Or you can type in a filter term, for example, the predicate bringen, which in this case gives you all predicates containing your search string. Using quotation marks around a filter term restricts it to exactly the string that you typed in, dismissing, for example, abbringen or einbringen. Double-clicking on a predicate in the example table opens a more detailed description of the example, including all annotated properties, the example ID, and the source. You can find a list of all source abbreviations and their references in Chapter 4 of the User's Guide. Double-clicking on the predicate once more will close the detailed view. Of course, you have this option in the predicate table as well, giving you the predicate ID, the associated properties, and all the sentences. Moreover, you can open the predicate in a separate window by clicking this option. If you want to download your search results, you can do so by clicking on Download Table Data. You will then download a zip file that includes an Excel and a CSV file. Let's move on to the second filter option. The Advanced Search gives you more possibilities when setting your filters. By clicking on Use Advanced Search, you open a separate filter interface. Let's look at the predicate table now, although you can also use the advanced search in the example table. You can select the column you want your filters to apply to from the drop-down options. You can then select the desired filter from this drop-down menu. For example, we now see all predicates that embed verb second clauses, abbreviated here as zero decal, standing for zero complementizer declaratives. You can add a second filter by clicking the plus symbol in the advanced search interface. For example, let's imagine we are interested in predicates that embed verb second clauses, that is, zero decal, where the embedded clause is indicative verb mood. Since we are looking at verb mood now, we should add that column to our table view as well. As you can see, there are 311 predicates that have at least one example showing both properties at the same time, that is, an example sentence with verb second embedding and indicative mood. While this search is pretty straightforward, many queries can become more complicated. Imagine that you want to know how many predicates license verb second embedding, where the sentence is not in indicative, but rather subjunctive mood. Since there are two types of subjunctives in German, conjunctive 1 and conjunctive 2, we need to set not one, but two additional filters to cover both types. However, listing each type of conjunctive as a separate filter like this means that we are looking for predicates where one single example sentence shows both conjunctive 1 and conjunctive 2 at the same time. This is impossible here, as each example is annotated for only one type of conjunctive. The search therefore returns 0 hits. Instead, we have to tell the database to look for separate examples in a predicate, either with conjunctive 1 or with conjunctive 2. We can do this, for example, by adding the two conjunctive filters within a so-called group of criteria. You add the two filters for verb mood and select the default option, at least one is true. The predicate table now shows you all predicates that have verb second embedding with either conjunctive 1 or conjunctive 2. But what if you want to know the number of predicates that have both a verb second example with conjunctive 1 and a different example with conjunctive 2? If you select all are true in the advanced search, it returns 0 hits, like before, because there cannot be an example that has both conjunctive 1 and 2 at the same time. To answer our question, there is another search instrument at our disposal when filtering the predicate table, the independent example criteria box below the table. This option overrides the default of searching for different filters on the same example sentence. Instead, it is now possible to apply multiple filters to different example sentences of a predicate. So, in our case, it will allow the search algorithm to return predicates that have an example with conjunctive 1 and an example with conjunctive 2. This option is also necessary when looking at negated filters. Imagine you want to know which predicates can never embed a DAS clause. In the default search, we get a list of predicates that have at least one example where there is not a DAS clause, which is, in fact, every predicate in the database. But what we actually want is a list of predicates that don't have a single example sentence featuring a DAS clause. For that, you have to check the Independent Example Criteria box as well, and voila, there you have all predicates that cannot embed a DAS clause at all. As you can see, the database comes with many features to filter the data. Of course, you can always download a subset of data and further filter the data in a program of your choice. Finishing up this tutorial, we hope we have shown you the essentials on how to use the database and how to filter the data. There is still a lot to be said about, for example, how we annotated the argument structure or argument realization. For information on this, we refer you to the user's guide of the database, introduced at the beginning of this tutorial. Alternatively, you can always contact us if you have questions or need support with setting your filters. Our email address is clause-embedding@leibniz-zas.de. Thanks for your attention.